In January 1995, the brutal slayings of Grant Henderson and Michelle Cartagena shocked the community near Macon, Georgia. The couple, both young and promising, were found shot to death at a secluded lover's lane along Lake Juliet. On the night of January 2nd, 1995, Grant Henderson and Michelle Cartagena were last seen together, enjoying a date before heading to a quiet lakeside parking area. The following morning, authorities discovered their lifeless bodies in Michelle's white Honda parked by the lake. The crime scene was perplexing. Investigators found evidence that the killer had fired 14 rounds from an AR-15 rifle and followed up with additional shots from a 9mm handgun. Oddly, Michelle's body had been moved and partially undressed, and the perp even left traces of tobacco spit on her. Early theories among investigators ranged widely. One prominent idea was that the killings resulted from a random act of violence, a lone predator striking an unsuspecting couple. Eyewitnesses reported seeing a blue Honda CRX in the vicinity that night, a detail that immediately became a focus for detectives. Other accounts focused on a movie theater patron who recalled seeing Grant and Michelle involved in a heated argument with a young man. This led some to speculate that jealousy or personal conflict might have played a role. Despite these theories, neither motive nor clear suspect emerged, leaving both law enforcement and the community frustrated. Determined to find leads, investigators deployed a range of forensic and investigative methods that were considered cutting edge at the time. The first major breakthrough came from ballistic analysis. Recovering shell casings at the scene allowed forensic teams to link the weapons used in the crime to specific weapon models. Detectives then combed through sales records and pawnshop transactions in the region, eventually focusing on a local man named Andrew Cook. Records showed that Cook had purchased an AR-15 in August 1994, and later, pawnshop receipts tied him to the very weapon used in the slayings. Forensic specialists also turned their attention to the unusual detail of the tobacco spit found on Michelle. Although DNA testing hadn't yet gained the prominence it would achieve just a few short years later, the evidence was preserved and eventually processed. This analysis would later provide a direct link between the crime scene and Cook, adding yet another layer of evidence against him. Another innovative aspect of the investigation was the linking of physical evidence with eyewitness accounts. The blue Honda CRX seen by witnesses was traced to Andrew Cook, whose vehicle matched the description exactly. By connecting the dots between the car, the weapons, and the physical evidence from the scene, law enforcement built a strong case that pointed squarely to Cook as the likely suspect. In an unusual investigative twist, the authorities enlisted the help of Andrew Cook's own father, a retired FBI agent, to gain further insight. While in custody, Cook was visited by his father, a trusted figure who managed to coax a confession from his son. The conversation, recorded and later presented in court, revealed that Cook admitted to being at the scene and carrying out the slayings purely to test if he could get away with it. This personal intervention, though emotionally fraught, proved pivotal in turning circumstantial evidence into a confession. In March 1998, Cook faced charges for the slayings of Grant Henderson and Michelle Cartagena. The prosecution laid out a compelling case, supported by forensic evidence, eyewitness testimony, and the damning confession obtained with the help of his father. The courtroom drama reached its peak when Cook's father took the stand, visibly torn between his duty as a law enforcement officer and his pain as a parent. The defense didn't contest Cook's guilt, but instead focused on mitigating factors such as his youth and mental health issues. They argued that his troubled state might have influenced his actions. However, the overwhelming evidence and the raw emotional impact of his father's testimony left little room for doubt. The jury ultimately convicted Andrew Cook on 2 counts of malice slaying, and the sentencing phase led to a recommendation for the death penalty. Following the trial, Andrew Cook was placed on death row in Georgia. His case went through the standard appeals process that's common in capital cases. His legal team fought for years to overturn the sentence, arguing that his confession might have been coerced by the emotional pressure of his father's involvement. Additional issues related to his mental health were brought up, again particularly in relation to the confession. Despite these appeals, every legal challenge was denied, and the death sentence remained intact. In February 2013, after nearly 15 years on death row, Cook's clemency appeal was rejected by the Georgia State Board of Pardons and Paroles. A final appeal challenging the state's lethal injection method briefly delayed the execution, but this stay was lifted by the Georgia Supreme Court on the day of the act. On February 21, 2013, Andrew Cook was ended via lethal injection. Before his execution, Cook offered a brief statement of remorse, apologizing for the senseless act that had not only claimed 2 innocent lives, but also devastated his own family. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here, just reminding you to hit subscribe and share this video on your socials and with your friends. Also, if you're new to my channels, check out Lazy Chill Zone and Lazy Chill History for way more content. In December 1993, Waterloo, Iowa was rocked by 2 brutal slayings that continue to confound investigators and haunt the local community. 2 elderly residents, 83-year-old Gladys Held and 87-year-old Jacob Barretts, were found dead in their own apartments on consecutive nights. These cases, marked by striking similarities in method and timing, have led many to suspect a single, elusive criminal may be responsible. Despite extensive investigations and modern forensic advances, the truth behind these acts remains a mystery. On the night of December 8, 1993, Gladys Held, a retired secretary, was attacked in her apartment at the Walnut Court Retirement Community at 315 Walnut Street. The following morning, when a concerned resident discovered that Gladys had missed her daily in-house service, alarm bells were raised. Initially, staff suspected that she may have had a medical emergency in the night. Responding officers found her lying in bed in disarray, with belongings scattered around the room. Evidence indicated that Gladys had been struck with her telephone and then strangled to death. Investigators later noted that Gladys's door was left unlocked and that a broken glass panel on an exterior door hinted at forced entry. A neighbor had even reported an unknown man entering an apartment the previous night and demanding money before retreating when refused. Although nothing of significant value appeared to have been stolen, the signs pointed to a burglary that escalated into a horrific act. The shocking nature of the crime left residents of Walnut Court fearful for their own safety, prompting the building's management to hire private security and urge tenants to remain vigilant. Less than 24 hours after the slaying of Gladys Held, another tragedy struck only a few blocks away. Jacob Barretts, affectionately known as Old Jake by locals, was found dead in his apartment at 311 Lafayette Street on the morning of December 10, 1993. Barretts, a retired auto mechanic who lived a quiet and solitary life, had already experienced a violent incident 2 weeks earlier during Thanksgiving weekend. In that previous home invasion, his apartment door was kicked in, and an assailant, described as a man dressed entirely in black, pepper sprayed and brutally beat him before stealing cash. Adding to the eerie connection between this act and the later slayings, part of this brutal assault included an attempt to strangle Jake. Jake advised the authorities that he had recently gotten into a dispute with a cab driver over what he believed to be unfair charges on a trip back to his apartment from a bar. Although Jake survived that attack, the scars of the assault were a painful reminder of the dangers he faced. On the night of December 9th, a neighbor noticed unusual activity near Barretts' apartment, reportedly observing a man wandering the complex and hearing a disturbance later that evening. When this neighbor and the landlady checked on Jake the next morning, they found him on his couch with his arms neatly crossed over his chest. The autopsy later determined that he had died from asphyxia caused by suffocation, likely the result of being smothered with a pillow. Unlike the extremely violent struggle in Held's apartment, Baretz's scene appeared controlled, almost as though the perpetrator had taken time to stage the scene. Given that Jake had already been targeted in a robbery, many began to wonder if the same criminal had returned to finish the job. The close timing and geographical proximity of these two slayings immediately raised suspicions that they might be the work of a single perpetrator. The two apartment buildings are situated only a few blocks apart, and both crimes occurred during the night. Although the exact details of each crime differ slightly, the overall pattern indicates that the perp might have been targeting vulnerable elderly residents, possibly with the intent to commit robbery. Police eventually began to treat the crimes as connected, and by 2005, officials were openly stating their belief that one man was behind both crimes. From the outset, the investigations into these slayings faced significant obstacles. Both cases yielded very few leads, and despite an intensive police effort, no eyewitnesses came forward with any definitive information. Forensic teams collected blood samples, hair fibers, and trace evidence from both scenes. Yet, no usable fingerprints were found, suggesting that the perp may have taken precautions, such as wearing gloves. Although DNA profiling was still emerging as an investigative tool at the time, the samples collected from both crime scenes have yet to match any known offender in the state database. And one question I had, and I'm sure you do too, is whether these two DNA samples match with one another. Well, I hate to break it to you, but the answer isn't readily available. That said, reading between the lines, you'll recall that in 2005 the cops said, they think it was the same guy. I think that's confirmation that the DNA from the scenes matches. All that said, the lack of a DNA match to a database continues to be one of the major stumbling blocks in solving these cases. The limited physical evidence was compounded by the absence of clear eyewitness testimony. In the case of Gladys Held, aside from a neighbor's report of a suspicious intruder demanding money, no one witnessed the crime. Similarly, although a neighbor reported hearing disturbances at Jacob Baretz's apartment, by the time anyone arrived, the assailant had already vanished into the night. In January 1994, Gladys Held's son even offered a reward for information that could lead to an arrest, but this too failed to produce any tangible leads. As a result, police were left with only circumstantial evidence to pursue, and despite periodic reviews by cold case units in later years, the perpetrator has never been identified. The scarcity of definitive evidence has given rise to numerous speculative theories about who might be behind these acts. One of the most popular ideas is that a single criminal was targeting elderly residents in Waterloo. Proponents of this theory point to the vulnerability of the victims and the methodical nature of the crimes as evidence that the assailant was experienced and calculated in his approach. According to this view, the perpetrator deliberately chose seniors who lived alone, making them easy targets for a burglary that quickly escalated. Another theory that has received significant attention centers on the individual implicated in Jacob Baretz's earlier robbery. Baretz had expressed suspicion that a particular cab driver was responsible for his brutal assault during Thanksgiving weekend. Although this taxi driver theory is intriguing, law enforcement has never publicly confirmed a strong link between him and either crime. Beyond the main theories, alternative ideas have circulated among amateur sleuths. Some speculate that the acts were not solely crimes of opportunity, but part of a broader plan to instill fear in the community. A few online theorists have suggested that the perpetrator might have been emboldened by what he perceived as lax security measures in senior housing. These theorists suggest this enabled him to target vulnerable residents with minimal risk of detection. Although there's little evidence to support a personal vendetta or a message-driven motive, this possibility adds yet another layer of complexity to these cases. Personally, I think the best chance for resolution of these cases is through genetic genealogy. The perpetrator's DNA has been cataloged, and these days, even if he isn't in a database, so long as one of his relatives wants to know what percentage Irish they are, he'll be caught. Lida McClinton Sullivan was a prominent American socialite whose untimely death in January 1987 shocked the nation. On the morning that her divorce was to be finalized, she was fatally shot while accepting a delivery of pink roses at her Atlanta home. The investigation that followed uncovered a tangled web of betrayal and greed that eventually pointed to her estranged husband, James Sullivan, as the man behind her slaying. Lida McClinton was born on January 7, 1952, into an influential and wealthy Black Atlanta family. Her mother, Joanne McClinton, served as a state representative, and her father, Emory McClinton, had a distinguished career with the U.S. Department of Transportation. Growing up in a family well known for its political and social standing, Lida enjoyed a privileged upbringing. She excelled in school and later graduated from Spelman College with a degree in political science. These accomplishments and her poised manner made her a beloved figure in Atlanta's social circles. In contrast, her husband, James Sullivan, was a white man from Boston with working-class origins. After moving to Georgia to help run his uncle's successful liquor distribution business, Sullivan quickly ascended into the world of high society. He and Lida were married in 1976, in a union that many at the time found surprising. However, behind the glamorous facade of their life together lay a turbulent marriage marred by Sullivan's infidelity, manipulation, and controlling behavior. On January 16, 1987, Lida was preparing for a pivotal day in her life. A divorce hearing was scheduled that day, a moment that promised to settle the contentious issues of their separation. Instead, the morning brought a shock that would forever change the McClinton family. At approximately 8:20 a.m., a man arrived at Lida's doorstep with a box of pink roses. According to eyewitness reports, when Lida answered the door, the delivery man unexpectedly produced a pistol and fired 2 shots. One bullet missed, but the other struck Lida in the temple, leading to her death within minutes of arriving at Piedmont Hospital. The manner of the slaying was as symbolic as it was brutal. The use of a floral delivery, a gesture typically associated with love or celebration, became a grim prelude to a calculated slaying. In the wake of Lida's demise, investigators faced a challenging case that spanned multiple jurisdictions. James Sullivan naturally became the immediate focus of attention, and sometimes the most obvious person is the one responsible. Initial clues centered around the fact that the delivery man appeared to have been in disguise. With few immediate leads, law enforcement was forced to piece together details from phone records, witness statements, and Sullivan's travel itinerary. It soon emerged that while Lida had been at home, her husband was in Palm Beach, Florida. However, evidence began to mount that pointed to Sullivan's indirect involvement in orchestrating the act. A key breakthrough in the investigation came years later when Philip Anthony Harwood was identified as the hitman. Harwood admitted that he had been paid $25,000 to carry out the slaying, and his testimony eventually implicated James Sullivan as the one who hired him. Although Harwood later maintained that he didn't personally pull the trigger, his role as the intermediary and his financial transaction with Sullivan provided compelling evidence. And just to be clear, it's still not clear who actually pulled the trigger, but most seem to agree it was Harwood. James's controlling and deceitful behavior painted a picture of a man willing to resort to extreme measures to protect his financial interests. With divorce proceedings looming and a substantial division of assets at stake, Sullivan had a clear motive to eliminate his wife and thereby control the outcome of the divorce settlement. Despite Sullivan's physical absence on the day of the slaying, investigators were able to connect him to the crime through a series of phone records and travel logs. Notably, a collect call from Sullivan was made from a location near Lita's home shortly after the shooting. These records, along with other circumstantial evidence, gradually built a case against him. His subsequent flight from justice, fleeing to various countries, and eventually being apprehended in Thailand, further reinforced suspicions that he was trying to escape accountability. Years later, after an international manhunt, Sullivan was arrested in Thailand in 2002 and extradited back to the United States. In 2006, after a long and arduous legal battle, an Atlanta jury convicted Sullivan of arranging the hit. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, marking a measure of justice for Lita's family. Notably, Harwood's testimony was crucial to securing a conviction. Harwood himself, despite almost certainly being the triggerman, has since been released from prison. In January 1993, 23-year-old Bonnie Haim vanished from her Jacksonville, Florida home, leaving behind her husband, Michael Haim, and their 3-year-old son, Aaron. Her disappearance remained a mystery for over 2 decades, until a remarkable discovery by her son brought long-awaited answers. Bonnie and Michael Haim appeared to lead a typical life of a young couple, and they both worked at a company owned by Michael's aunt. However, beneath the surface, their marriage was troubled. Friends reported that Bonnie was planning to leave Michael and take their son with her. Co-workers reported seeing Michael behaving extremely poorly towards Bonnie, which was corroborated by those who knew of her plans to leave. On the night before her disappearance, the couple had an argument. The following day, Bonnie was gone. Her purse was found in a dumpster at a hotel near Jacksonville International Airport, and her car was discovered in an airport parking lot. At the time, their young son, Aaron, told a child protection team member that he saw his father hurt his mother. Despite this, and the fact that Michael was a prime suspect, authorities lacked sufficient evidence to charge him, and the case went cold. In 2014, Aaron Fraser, who had been adopted by another family and changed his last name, took over his childhood home after winning a wrongful death lawsuit against his biological father. While renovating the property, Aaron made a shocking discovery. A set of human remains were buried in the backyard. Dental records confirmed that the remains belonged to his mother, Bonnie Haim. Following the discovery, Michael Haim was arrested and charged with second-degree slaying. The trial began in April 2019. Prosecutors presented evidence including the remains found on the property and statements from Aaron from when he was a child. In what seemed like it may have been an unfortunate twist, Aaron testified that he had no memory of the night his mother disappeared. However, his statements from when he was 3 were still allowed to be put to the jury, and remember to keep this in mind because it'll be important shortly. Michael Haim took the stand, denying any involvement in his wife's death. After 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury found him guilty of second-degree slaying. The judge subsequently sentenced Michael Haim to life in prison. In 2023, he filed an appeal, claiming ineffective counsel during his trial. The appeal contended that his trial lawyers failed to properly challenge statements made by his then 3-year-old son and did not present certain expert testimonies. As of now, Michael Haim remains incarcerated at Madison Correctional Institution. Anna Marie Hahn's story is a chilling blend of betrayal, greed, and the calculated exploitation of trust. Born in Bavaria in 1906, Hahn became one of America's most notorious female serial perpetrators, preying on elderly men in Cincinnati's German immigrant community during the 1930s. Her crimes, driven by financial desperation and a gambling addiction, left a trail of arsenic-laced deaths and forged wills, culminating in her historic execution in Ohio's electric chair in 1938. Anna Marie Hahn's descent into infamy began long before her arrival in the United States. The youngest of 12 children in a well-off Bavarian family, she faced social ostracization at 19 after giving birth to an illegitimate son. To avoid scandal, her family sent her to Cincinnati in 1929, where she lived with relatives and married Philip Hahn, a German immigrant and telegraph operator. The couple initially ran a bakery, but financial struggles during the Depression pushed Anna toward darker ventures. Notably, around this time, it's believed that she started gambling in an effort to turn her fortunes around. By 1932, she abandoned the bakery and reinvented herself as a caregiver for elderly, often isolated German immigrants. This role granted her access to vulnerable men, many of whom had no close family or friends. These men tended to be frugal working-class individuals who built up significant savings over the course of their lives. Hahn's charm and fluency in German endeared her to her charges, but behind her nurturing facade lay a calculated predator. She began poisoning her victims with arsenic, a poison she allegedly purchased under the guise of rat control to inherit their savings, property, or insurance payouts. Hahn's confirmed victims spanned from 1933 to 1937, though suspicions linger that her death toll may have been higher. Her 5 confirmed slayings included the following men. The first was Ernst Koch, who met his end on May 6, 1933. He was a recluse who left Hahn his house in his will shortly before dying of quote-unquote stomach troubles. Albert Parker died in 1936 after Hahn borrowed $1,000 from him just before his death. Jacob Wagner died on June 3, 1937, and left Hahn $17,000 in a forged will, later proven to match her handwriting. George Gesselman died on July 6, 1937, after transferring $15,000 to Hahn. And just to be clear, these aren't inflation-adjusted numbers. Hahn's evil acts in 1937 netted her at least $700,000. George Obendorfer died on August 1, 1937. He was a cobbler who died in Colorado under suspicious circumstances while traveling with Hahn and her son. Hahn's modus operandi was consistent: befriend the victim, manipulate them into altering wills or granting loans, then administer arsenic-laced food or drink. Arsenic symptoms, vomiting, diarrhea, and organ failure, mimicked natural ailments, allowing her to evade suspicion initially. Notably, one potential victim narrowly escaped after noticing flies dying from his contaminated beer and forcing Hahn to leave. And just to be clear, this man left out his empty beer mugs, attracting flies, and the death of the flies alerted him that something was seriously off with his beer. Talk about being rescued by your bad habits. The unraveling of Hahn's scheme began with Obendorfer's death in Colorado. Autopsies revealed lethal arsenic levels, prompting authorities to exhume earlier victims and discover similar poisoning. A search of Hahn's home uncovered arsenic, forged prescriptions, and incriminating financial documents. Her husband, Philip, also revealed she had twice tried to insure his life for $20,000. Hahn's trial, which began in October 1937, became a media circus. Prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence: toxicology reports, forged wills, and testimony from survivors. While she was only officially found guilty of the death of Jacob Wagner, this would ultimately be a moot point. But first, I want to briefly touch on why she did it. Hahn's primary motive appears to have been simple financial gain. The Great Depression had devastated her family's finances, and her gambling addiction, reportedly fueled by horse racing, drove her to extreme measures. By preying on elderly men with savings, but few social ties, she exploited a system where wills were seldom scrutinized, and arsenic poisoning could be mistaken for natural causes. Psychological theories suggest Hahn lacked empathy. viewing her victims as mere obstacles to wealth. Some have thought that the loss of her well-to-do status that she enjoyed in her childhood made her feel entitled to do whatever was necessary to get back what she felt was rightfully hers. Well, anything other than working for it legitimately. She was drawn in by the allure of fast money through slayings and gambling. And though I'm no psychologist, her ability to maintain a caring persona while administering slow, agonizing deaths points to some serious sociopathic tendencies. Despite appeals, Hahn was executed on December 7, 1938, at Ohio State Penitentiary. On June 22, 1987, 16-year-old Carrie Lynn Nixon from Ausable Forks, New York, vanished during a routine errand to a local store. This disappearance would spark a 7-year mystery that ended with the discovery of her remains and a chilling confession. Carrie Lynn Nixon was a sophomore at Ausable Valley Central School, known for her involvement in softball, singing, and writing. Described as a typical small-town teenager, she lived with her parents, Gary and Kathy, and 3 siblings in Ausable Forks, a quiet hamlet nestled in New York's Adirondack Mountains. On the evening of June 22, 1987, Carrie left her home at 9:30 p.m. to purchase groceries for her father at Thomas's Country Store, a 5-minute walk away. She was last seen alive at 10:05 p.m., exchanging greetings with a neighbor just 700 feet from her home. Her disappearance triggered an immediate search involving local volunteers and the authorities. Despite combing a 50-mile radius, no physical evidence surfaced, leaving authorities and her family desperate for answers. Initial theories split between abduction and runaway scenarios, but Carrie's close family ties, untouched savings, and lack of preparation pointed to foul play. And yes, this is one of those cases where some of the initial investigators decided that she was a runaway due to statements she made to friends and in her diary. She described wanting to move away from small-town upstate New York when she graduated from high school. Personally, I suspect that virtually everyone in small towns has ideas of moving to the big city to achieve their dreams after high school. But hey, I'm not a fancy small-town detective, so what do I know? The case gained national prominence after being featured on Unsolved Mysteries in 1989 and 1990. 2 bizarre leads dominated the early years of the investigation. In November 1987, an anonymous letter postmarked in Flint, Michigan, claimed Carrie was in Utahville, South Carolina. Desperate, her family traveled there and distributed flyers. A local resident, Shirley Canapel, reported speaking to a girl matching Carrie's description, who identified herself as Carrie Lynn Nixon and claimed to be from New York. Hypnosis sessions with Canapel yielded no concrete details, and the lead dissolved. It's unknown if this woman had any connection to the letter which was sent from Flint, Michigan. Some have speculated that she was an individual who simply wanted to insert herself into a high-profile investigation, but nothing was ever proven. Just as things were sorted out on this weird lead, the case took yet another very strange turn. In 1990, Carrie's parents viewed footage of a concert in Los Angeles and believed a girl in the crowd resembled their daughter. The concert was held in the summer of 1989, and investigators who thought she was a runaway also believed that it may actually depict Carrie. 2 of the band's members, Jonathan and Jordan Knight, publicly appealed for the girl to come forward, which led to a massive boost in visibility to Carrie's case. However, the individual was later identified as Lynette Melancon, a California resident unrelated to the case. These false hopes deepened the family's anguish. The case cracked open in 1993 when Robert Anthony Jones, a bank robber serving a 15-year federal sentence, confessed to Carrie's death. He did so as part of a plea deal to reduce his wife Teresa's involvement in his crimes. Teresa had served as his getaway driver on bank robberies, and these 2 idiots kept their young children in the getaway car, apparently as potential cover if they were caught. Jones, a former Osable Forks resident, revealed he had abducted Carrie while she walked home from the store. His quote-unquote reasoning for this abduction is highly disturbing. Jones claimed that he committed the act because he was upset that his wife Teresa had cheated on him. However, I have to question whether this absolutely disturbed reasoning was simply his attempt to shift some of the moral guilt onto his wife. That said, he only confessed to the crime to reduce his wife's sentence to begin with, so perhaps there's no use trying to deduce the logic of a perpetrator such as this. He drove her to a remote cabin owned by his father in Jay, New York, where he assaulted her and ended her life. He buried her in a shallow grave nearby, later admitting he returned annually with his family for picnics to monitor the site. Notably, Jones was never on the authorities' radar, and had he not confessed to the slaying, and given the remote location of the cabin, it's likely this would never have been solved. In January 1994, authorities exhumed Carrie's remains, along with the groceries she had purchased that night. Forensic analysis corroborated Jones's account, proving his involvement. He pleaded guilty to kidnapping, assault, and slaying charges, receiving an 18-year-to-life sentence. Robert Jones has sought parole on every occasion on which he's been eligible, which of course has put Carrie's family through significant additional grief. However, his requests for parole have been repeatedly rejected, and given the heinous nature of his crime, I would hope that this continues to be the case. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to share this video with your friends and family. Also, if you like my content, I've got two other channels, one which focuses on mysteries and another which focuses on history, so check them out. In 1985, Roger Dean, a 51-year-old resident of Lone Tree, Colorado, was tragically slain in his home. On the morning of November 21, 1985, an armed intruder wearing a ski mask entered the Dean residence. He forced Roger to tie up and blindfold his wife, DJ, before taking Roger to another room. Moments later, to the horror of DJ, she heard shots ringing out. Roger was shot multiple times at point-blank range as he attempted to flee. He collapsed in the driveway and died before help could arrive. The assailant fled the scene, leaving behind the ski mask for unknown reasons. Keep this piece of evidence in mind, because let's just say it's going to be important. From the outset, investigators noted several peculiarities. Roger had twine marks on only one wrist, suggesting he had not been fully restrained. Additionally, while he was wearing contact lenses at the time of his death, his glasses were found upstairs with duct tape over the lenses, implying a staged blindfold. These anomalies led authorities to theorize that Roger might have orchestrated a fake kidnapping, possibly to withdraw $30,000 from his bank account without his wife's knowledge. According to this hypothesis, the robber that Roger hired to play the part may have advised that he wanted a bigger cut of the withdrawal than previously agreed upon. This led to a rapid falling out between the two men, leading to the slaying of Roger. However, this theory was never substantiated, and the case went cold. 5 years after the slaying, in July 1990, DJ received an anonymous letter from someone claiming to be the perpetrator. The writer demanded $100,000 and threatened to harm her daughter, Tammy, if the demands were not met. Over the next few weeks, the extortionist made several threatening phone calls, providing specific details about the events that were not publicly known. Despite the FBI's involvement and attempts to apprehend the caller during a money drop, the extortionist was never identified, and the threats eventually ceased. In the years following the slaying, the ski mask left at the scene was preserved as evidence. Advancements in DNA technology allowed investigators to develop a DNA profile from hairs found on the mask. In 2003, this profile was entered into national databases, but no matches were found. In 2018, With the emergence of genetic genealogy, investigators revisited the case. By 2020, they had identified potential relatives of the suspect through these databases. This led them to Michael Jefferson, who had lived in Colorado at the time of the slaying and had a criminal history in Denver. To confirm Jefferson's involvement, detectives discreetly collected a discarded water bottle he used during a flight. The DNA from the bottle matched the profile obtained from the ski mask. In April 2021, Michael Jefferson, then 64, was arrested in Los Angeles and extradited to Colorado. He was charged with first-degree slaying and kidnapping. In a significant development, Jefferson pleaded guilty to second-degree slaying in connection with Roger Dean's death. He was subsequently sentenced to 32 years in prison. The exact circumstances of why the events that led to Roger's demise occurred are still unknown. The case of Hermann Duft and Hans Wilhelm Bassenauer stands out both for its brutality and the swiftness with which justice was served. These two German nationals embarked on a spree in Greece during the early months of 1969, leaving a trail of death and raising questions about their motives and the nature of their crimes. Both born in 1938 in Germany, Hermann Duft hailed from Harheim near Frankfurt, while Bassenauer was from Darmstadt. Professionally, they were plumbers. Duft remained single throughout his life, whereas Bassenauer was married and a father to 3 children. Notably, Duft had a stint in the French Foreign Legion during the Algerian War, an experience that might have influenced his later actions. Arriving in Greece by car on February 17, 1969, Duft and Bassenauer posed as your typical tourists. Over the next few weeks, they committed a series of brutal slayings, primarily driven by robbery. Their choice of weapons included a Winchester and a knife. There's little information about the victims in this case, which I believe is due to the fact that Greece was under a military dictatorship at the time this occurred. On March 5, 1969, near Thebes, they attacked a gas station, killing the night watchman and a soldier, while severely injuring another soldier. On March 13, 1969, in Vula, they attacked and ended a Greek-American stockbroker who was in the country on business. On April 7, 1969, they claimed their next victim, a taxi driver. On April 9, 1969, they killed a gas station attendant near Athens during what was initially thought to be a botched robbery. On April 12, 1969, they committed their last offense while on the road from Athens to Patras. They slew a Greek national who had been residing in Germany and was visiting his homeland. After this slaying, they abandoned their vehicle and used the victim's car to return to Athens. The breakthrough in the case came on April 16, 1969. A vigilant individual noticed small specks of blood on a car with German license plates parked outside his residence. This vehicle belonged to the duo's most recent victim. When Duft and Bassenauer arrived to retrieve the car, the police were alerted. Upon questioning, they confessed to their crimes and were subsequently arrested. Notably, given that Greece was under a repressive military dictatorship at the time, some have questioned just how voluntary these confessions were. The trial was conducted at the appeals court, where both men faced charges of slaying, robbery, and related offenses. They were found guilty and received death sentences for each of the 6 acts. Their appeals to the Areopagus Supreme Court and requests for clemency from the Council of Pardons were denied. And remember when I said that justice would be swift in this case? Well, I wasn't kidding. On December 15, 1969, both were executed by firing squad, Bassenauer in Corfu and Duft in Aegina, corresponding to the locations of their respective incarcerations. In the aftermath, Bassenauer's widow remarked that her husband received a just punishment, but expressed discontent over the timing of the execution. According to her, the Greek authorities ought to have waited until after Christmas to carry out the punishment, which is an interesting take to say the least. On May 26, 1990, the peaceful community of Wellington, Florida, was shaken by a chilling crime that would perplex investigators for decades. Marlene Warren, a 40-year-old mother, was at home with her son, Joseph Aarons, and his friends when an unexpected visitor arrived. A person dressed as a clown, complete with an orange wig, red nose, and white gloves, approached the front door carrying a bouquet of flowers and 2 balloons. One balloon bore the message, "You're the greatest," and the other featured Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. Marlene answered the door, and as she admired the unexpected gifts, the clown pulled out a weapon and ruthlessly shot her in the face. The assailant then calmly walked back to a white Chrysler LeBaron and drove away. Marlene was rushed to the hospital but succumbed to her injuries 2 days later. The bizarre nature of the crime left the community in shock and investigators scrambling for answers. Initial suspicions fell on Marlene's husband, Michael Warren, who owned a used car lot and was reportedly having an affair with Sheila Keene, an employee who repossessed cars for him. Both Michael and Sheila denied the affair, but witnesses and circumstantial evidence suggested otherwise. Notably, employees from a local costume shop identified Sheila as the woman who had purchased an identical clown costume just days before the slaying. However, since this crime took place in 1990, cameras weren't ubiquitous, and no surveillance evidence existed to absolutely prove this. Additionally, a store clerk from Publix recalled selling balloons and flowers matching those found at the crime scene to a woman resembling Sheila shortly before the shooting. Despite these leads, the case went cold due to a lack of concrete evidence. It wasn't until 2014 that advancements in DNA technology provided a breakthrough. Investigators re-examined a hair fiber found in the suspected getaway car, which had been abandoned shortly after the slaying. The DNA analysis linked the hair to Sheila Keene, leading to her arrest in 2017, 27 years after the crime. Oh, and there's one thing I should mention. Sheila Keene had taken on a new identity, so to speak. Sheila Keene Warren. Sheila had married Michael Warren in 2002, and the couple had relocated to Abingdon, Virginia, where they operated a restaurant together. Facing a first-degree elimination charge and the possibility of a life sentence, Sheila Keene Warren maintained her innocence in spite of the forensic evidence. However, in April 2023, she accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to second-degree slaying. She was sentenced to 12 years in prison, but was credited for the time she had already served since her 2017 arrest. Due to Florida's weak sentencing guidelines that apply to when the act was committed, this allowed significant credit for good behavior, and Sheila was released from prison in November 2024. This resulted in her serving approximately 18 months following her plea deal, which has caused a great deal of outrage. Throughout Sheila's legal proceedings, Michael has consistently supported her, maintaining her innocence. While there's no absolute confirmation that they're still together, public records indicate that they're not formally divorced, as of 2025. Over the years, Michael Warren has been a person of interest in the investigation, and many still question whether he was involved in the slaying in some way. Also, I think it's important here to take a moment to discuss the distinction between a person of interest and a suspect. A person of interest is someone authorities believe may have information relevant to an investigation, but no evidence directly implicates them in a crime. A suspect is someone the authorities believe to have committed the crime. A person of interest doesn't necessarily need to have been the responsible party in a crime. This term is broader and applies to individuals who might have information helpful to the investigation. They could be witnesses, acquaintances of suspects, or people with connections to the crime scene or victim. Being a person of interest doesn't imply guilt or direct involvement. It simply means investigators believe the individual may assist in clarifying the circumstances of the case. Michael Warren has consistently denied any involvement in Marlene's death and has never been charged in connection with the crime. Some have pointed to Michael's criminal history as potential circumstantial support for his involvement in the elimination. In 1994, Michael Warren was convicted of grand theft, racketeering, and odometer tampering, resulting in a nearly 4-year prison sentence. However, these charges were of course unrelated to his wife's slaying and weren't violent offenses. Michael's never faced any charges whatsoever in relation to his wife's slaying. And you know what they say, if you've never been charged, you couldn't have possibly been in on it. Also, I'll just include a pause here for no reason whatsoever. On February 24th, 1986, Sherry Rasmussen, a 29-year-old nursing director, was found dead in the condominium she shared with her husband, John Rutan, in Los Angeles. She had been beaten and shot 3 times, with a noticeable bite mark on her left forearm. At the time of the slaying, the LAPD quickly categorized the crime as a burglary gone wrong, focusing on the appearance of a ransacked living room and a stolen BMW. Investigators overlooked the possibility of a personal motive, despite evidence like the bite mark on Rasmussen's arm, which suggested a close and physical altercation. Also, keep in mind these initial investigative missteps, because this will be a source of controversy when the case was finally solved. Before their marriage, John Rutan had been in an on-again, off-again relationship with Stephanie Lazarus, who had been a fellow student at UCLA. While John viewed their relationship as casual, Lazarus harbored very deep feelings, which some thought bordered on obsession. When Lazarus finished up college, she ended up joining the LAPD, another factor which will be very important going forward here. After John's engagement to Rasmussen, Lazarus reportedly confronted Rasmussen at her workplace, stating, "If I can't have John, no one else will." Despite this alarming interaction, the initial investigation did not thoroughly explore Lazarus as a suspect. The case remained cold for over 2 decades with little in the way of new leads or evidence. In 2009, advancements in DNA technology prompted the LAPD to reopen the investigation. A re-examination of the evidence, particularly the bite mark on Rasmussen's arm, revealed that the DNA belonged to a female. This pivotal discovery shifted the focus towards Stephanie Lazarus, who had by then risen to the rank of detective within the LAPD. Undercover officers collected a DNA sample from Lazarus by retrieving a discarded cup, which matched the DNA from the crime scene. In 2012, Stephanie Lazarus was convicted of first-degree elimination and sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. She appealed the conviction, but in 2015, the California Court of Appeal upheld the verdict. During a 2023 parole hearing, Lazarus finally confessed to the crime, apparently in an effort to convince the parole board that she was exhibiting contrition for her acts. The mishandling of the initial investigation, particularly the oversight of Lazarus as a suspect, led to legal actions against the LAPD. Rasmussen's parents filed a lawsuit against the department, alleging negligence, but the case was dismissed. Additionally, the investigator who identified the key DNA evidence sued the city and the police department, claiming she faced retaliation for her findings. I'm going to guess that you don't really need me to tell you how successful her lawsuit was. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to share this video with your friends and family. Also, if you like my content, I've got 2 other channels, one which focuses on mysteries and another which focuses on history, so check them out. Dennis Depew was born in 1943 in Michigan and worked as a property assessor. In 1971, he married Marilyn, a high school guidance counselor in Coldwater, Michigan. The couple had 3 children and appeared to lead a typical family life. However, beneath the surface, their marriage was fraught with tension. Dennis was described as controlling and paranoid, often accusing Marilyn of turning their children against him. This behavior led Marilyn to file for divorce in 1989, seeking to end their tumultuous relationship. On Easter Sunday, 1990, Dennis arrived at the family home for a scheduled visit with his children. When they refused to go with him, an argument began between Dennis and Marilyn. In a fit of rage, Dennis pushed Marilyn down the stairs and brutally beat her in front of their children. He then told the children he would take her to the hospital, but they never arrived. Instead, Dennis shot Marilyn in the back of the head, wrapped her body in a sheet, and disposed of her behind an abandoned church. On the same day, Ray and Marie Thornton were driving along Snow Prairie Road near Coldwater when they noticed a green Chevrolet van driving aggressively. Later, they saw the same van parked beside an old schoolhouse, with a man disposing of a bloody sheet. Suspicious, the Thorntons attempted to gather information and later reported their observations to the Michigan State Police. This crucial tip led authorities to discover Marilyn's body and identify Dennis as the prime suspect. Following the slaying, Dennis became a fugitive, sending a series of bizarre letters to friends and family, attempting to justify his actions. These letters were postmarked from various states, indicating his constant movement to evade capture. The case gained national attention when it was featured on the popular show Unsolved Mysteries in March 1991. This would quickly set off the spark which would solve this case once and for all. Shortly after the airing, a viewer from Dallas, Texas, contacted the police to report a man matching Dupuy's description living in her area. And by her area, I mean that he was her live-in boyfriend, who she knew by the ridiculous name of Hank Queen. Sorry to all the Hank Queens out in my audience, it's just not exactly a low-profile name to adopt when you go on the lam. But there was one problem. Before the girlfriend learned of the broadcast, she had been informed by Dennis that he had to go take care of his sick mother. This was, of course, an excuse to flee the area as quickly as possible, though I question why he really needed an excuse given what's about to happen next. Her friend, who was watching Unsolved Mysteries, let her know just after he left, and the girlfriend relayed all the information to the authorities. That same night, Louisiana state troopers at the Louisiana-Mississippi state border noticed a van with Dennis's license plate. Dennis led the police on a high-speed chase, breaking through 2 sets of barriers which were set up to stop him. He engaged in a gunfight with the police while he was driving, and ultimately, when he realized he couldn't escape, he decided to take out the trash himself, if you catch my drift. Holly Lynn Bobo, a 20-year-old nursing student from Darden, Tennessee, was last seen alive on April 13, 2011. On that fateful morning, her brother, Clint Bobo, reported seeing her walking into the woods near their home with a man dressed in camouflage. Clint initially believed the man to be Holly's boyfriend and didn't intervene. His assumption, though understandable given the circumstances, delayed the immediate identification of her disappearance as an abduction. Shortly after Holly vanished, neighbors heard blood-curdling screams. Clint called his mother and reported that something seemed amiss. By the time law enforcement arrived, Holly was gone. The incident triggered one of the largest searches in Tennessee history, with thousands of volunteers combing the dense woods, rivers, and fields surrounding Darden. The community's effort to find Holly became a rallying cry, symbolizing their shared determination and resilience. Despite the scale of the search, tangible leads were scarce in the early months. Law enforcement soon zeroed in on the possibility that Holly had been abducted, but progress was frustratingly slow. Tips flooded in, and the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation worked tirelessly to piece together what little evidence they had. Holly's case was a priority, but the lack of immediate suspects or physical evidence hindered their efforts. Investigators were also careful to preserve the integrity of their case, fearing that any misstep could derail potential prosecutions. In 2014, a breakthrough came when hunters discovered human remains in Decatur County, approximately 20 miles from Holly's home. The remains, later confirmed to be Holly's through dental records, were a grim conclusion to years of uncertainty. It was determined that Holly had been slain by a gunshot wound to the back of her head. The discovery of her body transformed the case from a missing persons investigation to a slaying case and provided crucial evidence for the prosecution. The investigation took a decisive turn when authorities arrested Zachary Adams in March 2014. Adams, a local with a history of criminal activity, had been a person of interest in the case. Soon after, Jason Autry, a known associate of Adams, was also arrested. Both men were charged with aggravated kidnapping and first-degree felony slaying. Later that year, John Dylan Adams, Zachary's brother, was implicated as well. The arrest provided a long-awaited sense of progress in a case that had gripped the community. The prosecution built its case meticulously, relying on a combination of physical evidence, witness testimonies, and circumstantial evidence. During Zachary Adams' trial in 2017, Jason Autry agreed to testify against him in exchange for leniency. Autry's testimony was a dramatic moment in the trial, offering harrowing details of Holly's final hours. Autry recounted how, on the day of her disappearance, he saw Holly alive at Zachary Adams' residence. According to his testimony, they transported Holly to a riverbank with the intent of disposing of her body. Autry described how Zachary then shot Holly in the back of the head to ensure she was dead. The trial was closely followed by the public, and emotions ran high. The prosecution emphasized the premeditation and brutality of the crime, painting a picture of individuals who acted with deliberate malice. Defense attorneys argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that Autry's testimony was unreliable, given his motivation to secure a reduced sentence. Despite these arguments, the jury found Zachary Adams guilty of first-degree felony slaying and aggravated kidnapping. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 50 years. John Dylan Adams also faced justice. In 2018, he entered an Alford plea to charges of facilitation of first-degree slaying and aggravated kidnapping. An Alford plea allows a defendant to maintain their innocence while acknowledging that the prosecution has sufficient evidence to convict. John Dylan Adams was sentenced to 35 years in prison, avoiding a trial, but accepting the weight of the charges against him. The Holly Bobo case took another twist in 2024 when Jason Autry recanted his trial testimony. Autry, who had been a key witness in Zachary Adams' conviction, claimed that his previous statements were fabricated. He alleged that he had lied to secure a lighter sentence and that his role in the case had been misrepresented. This recantation prompted Adams' defense team to file for a new trial, arguing that the conviction was based on false testimony. However, a Tennessee judge denied the petition, ruling that Autry's recantation did not provide sufficient grounds to overturn the conviction. The judge emphasized that the overall weight of the evidence, including forensic findings and other testimonies, supported the original verdict. On December 19, 1987, 17-year-old Barbara Blatnick, a resident of Garfield Heights, Ohio, spent the evening with friends. After attending a local bar to see a band play, the gathering moved to a friend's house. Around 10 p.m., Barbara called her mother to say she'd be home soon. Later that night, friends dropped her off near the corner of Warner Road and Grand Division Avenue in Garfield Heights, close to her boyfriend's house. She never arrived, and this was the last time she was seen alive. The next morning, December 20th, 1987, Barbara's body was discovered in a wooded area off O'Neill Road, near Blossom Music Center in Cuyahoga Falls. She had been subjected to SA and strangled. The Summit County medical examiner confirmed that strangulation was the cause of death. Despite extensive efforts, the investigation stalled due to a lack of leads. The case remained unsolved for over 3 decades. In 2019, the Porchlight Project, a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting with cold cases in Ohio, took an interest in Barbara's case. They funded advanced DNA testing and forensic genealogical analysis. The DNA evidence, including material found under Barbara's fingernails, was analyzed successfully. They used public genealogy databases to identify potential relatives of the suspect. This led investigators to James E. Zastovnik, a 67-year-old Cleveland resident. On May 6, 2020, Zastovnik was arrested and charged with Barbara Blatnick's slaying. Following his arrest, Zastovnik was charged with 1 count of slaying and 1 of aggravated slaying. He pleaded not guilty and was released on bail due to the global situation at the time. His trial was scheduled for October 22, 2021, but his declining health led to multiple postponements. However, before the trial could commence, Zastovnik died of cancer on August 24, 2021, while out on bail and residing with his brother. Zastovnik's death left many questions unanswered, as the trial would have provided a platform for evidence presentation and cross-examination. For the family, his passing without a trial meant they were deprived of the opportunity to confront him and gain a deeper understanding of the events surrounding her death. Her sister, Donna Zanath, expressed frustration, stating that she felt deprived of the opportunity to know why he committed this horrific and heinous act. In April 1989, Ethel Kidd disappeared under mysterious circumstances and was subsequently found deceased. And believe me when I say it, you're not going to believe the truly insane coincidence that led to this case being solved. Ethel and her husband, Gilbert, had recently retired to this rural area, eager to spend their golden years close to their children and grandchildren. Their new home symbolized a fresh chapter, but it soon became the backdrop for a tragic event. On April 12, 1989, Ethel was last seen retrieving her mail around 2 p.m. The following morning, when she failed to answer her daughter's routine call and missed their morning coffee, concern grew. Her son-in-law visited the house and found the front door unlocked, Ethel absent, and a local map inexplicably lying in the yard. There were no signs of a struggle, deepening the mystery of her disappearance. A week later, a hunter discovered Ethel's body in a wooded area 3 miles from her home. She was bound to a tree, and the condition of her remains suggested she had been slain approximately 7 days earlier. In an extremely twisted turn, despite the evidence showing she had been slain at this time, her body showed little decomposition. Forensic investigators came to the conclusion that she had been kept in a refrigerated environment before being left in the woods. An autopsy confirmed that she had been subject to SA as well. The investigation yielded several perplexing clues. The map found in Ethel's yard contained motel stationery with writings of a disturbing and erotic nature. Further, a handwritten list outlined items and steps that appeared to be a blueprint for committing an elimination, including references to selecting a location and obtaining a new identity. Investigators also noted the cord used to bind Ethel was a type used exclusively in hospitals and hotels and not readily available to the public. This helped investigators narrow the potential profile of the perpetrator, especially in combination with the usage of motel stationery. Despite these leads, the case went cold until it was featured on the television program Unsolved Mysteries. The original broadcast in 1991 yielded no new leads or information. However, in 1995, A viewer recognized the handwriting from the broadcast and contacted authorities, suggesting it matched that of Edward Wayne Beverly. At the time, Beverly was incarcerated in Tennessee for unrelated crimes. Handwriting analysis confirmed the match, and further investigation revealed that Beverly had lived in the same town at the time of Ethel's slaying, but had moved away shortly thereafter. DNA testing and fingerprint analysis provided conclusive evidence linking Beverly to the crime. Authorities surmised that Beverly approached Ethel under the guise of needing directions, using a map as a prop to show how confused he was, before abducting, assaulting, and slaying her. In 1997, Edward Beverly was convicted and received 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Beverly died of unknown causes in prison in 2008. It's almost impossible to overstate just how staggeringly improbable this resolution was. Solving a brutal, years-old slaying based on a single flash of handwriting on a TV show is the kind of lightning strike moment that investigators and internet sleuths dream about. Had that person missed the broadcast or never connected the dots, there's every chance Ethel's slaying would still be a mystery. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and to check out my content on my other channels. In September 1997, the small town of Vincennes, Indiana, was shaken by the brutal slaying of 19-year-old Brooke Baker, a journalism student at Vincennes University. Known for her ambition and dedication, Brooke was an active member of the university's newspaper, The Trailblazer, and had a promising future ahead. On September 7, 1997, Brooke's brother discovered her lifeless body in her off-campus apartment. She had been essayed and stabbed multiple times, with 11 stab wounds indicating an extremely violent struggle. The crime scene presented peculiar details. The bathtub faucet was left running, and towels were found soaking, suggesting an attempt to clean up. A soapy knife, believed to be the elimination weapon, was found in the kitchen sink. Initially, investigators considered several leads. Brooke had been investigating an alleged SA involving a fraternity on campus, which had led to threats against her. Additionally, her landlord, a campus police officer, had exhibited inappropriate behavior, making her uncomfortable. Despite these leads, the case went cold due to a lack of concrete evidence and viable suspects. The breakthrough came nearly 2 years later, in July 1999, when another Vincennes University student, Erica Norman, was reported missing. Her apartment bore some striking similarities to Brooke's crime scene. The bathtub faucet was left running, and a couch cushion was found inside the tub, much like with the towels at Brooke's. Blood splatters indicated a violent encounter, but Erica's body was missing. Investigators learned that Erica was last seen with Brian Jones, a former Vincennes University student. Jones cooperated with the investigation, providing a DNA sample and allowing searches of his property. Forensic analysis revealed blood consistent with Erica's in his car and home. Tragically, Erica's body was discovered weeks later in a rural Illinois cornfield. The evidence led to Jones being charged with her slaying. Further investigation revealed that Jones's DNA matched the sample recovered from Brooke Baker's crime scene, conclusively linking him to both events. In 2000, Jones pleaded guilty to Erica Norman's slaying, receiving a 60-year prison sentence. He was subsequently tried and convicted for the slaying of Brooke Baker, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Bonnie Craig was an 18-year-old freshman at the University of Alaska Anchorage. On September 28, 1994, she left her Anchorage home before dawn, aiming to catch a bus for her early morning English class. Tragically, she never arrived, and later that day, hikers discovered her lifeless body in McHugh Creek, about 10 miles from her bus stop. The initial assumption was that she had died from a fall, but further examination revealed she had been essayed and slain. The investigation into Bonnie's death faced significant challenges. Despite the collection of DNA evidence from the crime scene, there were no immediate matches in the national database, leaving the case unsolved for years. During this period, Bonnie's mother, Karen Foster, tirelessly sought justice for her daughter. She even considered the possibility that her own undercover work with the local police, which had led to the arrest of several substance pushers, might have made her family a target for retaliation. A breakthrough came in November 2006, when a routine search of CODIS matched the DNA from Bonnie's case to that of Kenneth Dion. Dion, a former soldier stationed in Alaska during the early 1990s, was serving time in New Hampshire for a series of armed robberies. His DNA had been entered into the national database in 2006, leading to the match. Dion had never been a suspect nor a person of interest in Bonnie's case. Following his indictment in 2007, Dion's trial faced multiple delays, finally commencing in May 2011. During the trial, Dion claimed that he had consensual relations with Bonnie and suggested that she might have fallen to her death afterward. However, the prosecution presented compelling evidence, including the fact that Bonnie was in a committed relationship at the time with a boyfriend whom she loved very much. Additionally, the nature of her injuries indicated assault rather than an accidental fall. In June 2011, nearly 17 years after Bonnie's death, Dion was found guilty of first-degree elimination, aggravated by the heinous essay he conducted. He was sentenced to 124 years in prison, ensuring he would never cause more harm. In the quiet town of Noel, Missouri, the morning of October 6, 1989, began with a shocking discovery. Employees arriving at the State Bank of Noel found the vault open and approximately $70,000 missing. Perhaps more alarmingly, the bank's president, Dan Short, was nowhere to be found. Dan Short, a well-respected figure in the community, had been leading the bank since 1983. His sudden disappearance, coupled with the substantial theft, sent ripples of fear and confusion through the small town. The initial investigation considered the possibility of Short's involvement in the theft. Significant preliminary inquiries were made into any debts or obligations he may have had, or if he had any criminal connections, but he was as clean as a whistle. Any thoughts of him being connected were quickly dismissed when, 5 days later, his body was discovered in Grand Lake near Cowskin Bridge in Oklahoma. The circumstances of Short's death were particularly harrowing. He had been bound to a chair with a chain hoist attached to his left ankle using gray duct tape, and a concrete block was affixed to the chair, presumably to weigh him down. Evidence suggested that Short was still alive when he was thrown into the lake, making his death not only a slaying, but a particularly cruel and heinous one. The investigation into Short's kidnapping and elimination was extensive. Authorities discovered that the bank had been experiencing financial difficulties and was under audit, leading to various theories about potential suspects and motives. However, the breakthrough came when two brothers, Joseph and Shannon Agofsky, became prime suspects. Both had been observed spending large amounts of money following the robbery, despite being unemployed. Additionally, further forensic evidence linked them to the crime scene. In 1992, the Agofsky brothers were indicted and tried in Missouri. After a 7-day federal trial, both were found guilty of conspiracy, aggravated bank robbery, and use of a weapon while committing a felony, resulting in life sentences plus 5 years. Notably, this federal trial didn't include the slaying itself, given that it wasn't a federal offense. Further trials in 1997 led to Shannon's conviction for the slaying, while the jury couldn't reach a verdict for Joseph. However, given their previous convictions, they were safely locked behind bars. Shannon received an additional life sentence for short slaying. Later, in 2004, Shannon was sentenced to death for the elimination of a fellow inmate, Luther Plant, at a federal prison in Texas. He remains on death row, while Joseph died in prison in 2013.